They called her the old lady who pays for everything, but they never expected she'd read the fine print her late husband left behind at my granddaughter's wedding. I noticed my name tag said, "The old lady who's paying for everything." I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment on the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. I've always believed that family celebrations should be moments of joy. My granddaughter Jennifer's wedding was supposed to be one of those perfect days, the kind that warms your heart whenever you remember it. Instead, it became the day I discovered how my family truly saw me. The morning of the wedding, I spent extra time getting ready. At 65, I'm not vain, but I wanted to look my best. I chose a pale blue dress that Robert, my late husband, had always loved, styled my silver hair carefully, and even applied a touch of the perfume he'd given me for our last anniversary before cancer took him 3 years ago. "You look beautiful, Alice," I told my reflection, imagining Robert saying those words. I could almost hear his voice, feel his presence beside me. The ceremony at St. Mark's Church was lovely. Jennifer looked radiant walking down the aisle, her face glowing with happiness. My son Richard beamed proudly as he escorted her, and even my daughter-in-law Pamela seemed genuinely emotional. For those brief moments, everything felt right. It was at the reception where everything changed. I arrived at the grand ballroom of the Westbrook Hotel, making my way to the check-in table where guests were collecting their name tags and table assignments. The young woman at the table smiled as she rifled through the alphabetized cards. "Here you are, Mrs. Edwards," she said cheerfully, handing me my name tag. I glanced down, expecting to see Alice Edwards, grandmother of the bride. Instead, in elegant calligraphy, were the words, "The old lady who will pay for everything." My hand froze mid-air. Surely this was a mistake. "Is something wrong?" the young woman asked, noticing my expression. I forced a smile. "There seems to be a mix-up with my name tag." She leaned over to look, and her eyes widened. "Oh, I'm so sorry. Let me check if there's another one." "It's fine," I said quickly, not wanting to cause a scene at Jennifer's wedding. "I'll speak with my family about it." I pinned the offensive tag to my dress and made my way into the ballroom, my cheeks burning with humiliation. Had Jennifer approved this? Richard, Pamela, who thought this was appropriate, let alone funny. Throughout the cocktail hour, I tried to enjoy myself, chatting with other guests who either didn't notice my name tag or were too polite to mention it. Then I overheard a conversation that made my blood run cold. "Did you see the grandmother's name tag?" someone whispered with a snicker. Pamela said they thought it would be hilarious. Another voice replied, "She's their ATM." I moved away quickly, my hands shaking. Just then, Richard spotted me and waved me over to a group of well-dressed guests. "Mom," he called, his voice carrying across the room. "Come meet the Andersons. Dad used to golf with Bill." I approached reluctantly. Bill Anderson looked vaguely familiar, one of Robert's business associates. Perhaps. "Mom, this is Bill and Martha Anderson," Richard said, then added with a laugh, "Mom, our walking bank account." Martha Anderson's smile faltered as she glanced at my name tag. Bill looked uncomfortable. "Alice Edwards," I said firmly, extending my hand. "Robert's widow." "Of course," Bill said kindly. "Robert spoke of you often. He was very proud of you." The conversation continued, but I barely heard it. When the Andersons moved on, I pulled Richard aside. "What's the meaning of this?" I asked, pointing to my name tag. Richard laughed. "Oh Mom, don't be so sensitive. It's just a joke. Everyone knows you're the one with the deep pockets since Dad left you everything." "It's humiliating," I said quietly. "Oh please," he rolled his eyes. "Lighten up, it's a party." Before I could respond, Pamela appeared lugant in her mother-of-a-Via bride dress. "There you are, Alice. Has Richard been introducing you around? We want everyone to know who's responsible for this gorgeous wedding." She winked, and they both laughed. I excused myself and headed for the restroom, needing a moment alone. As I dabbed at my eyes with a tissue, the door opened and an older gentleman in a well-tailored suit entered, then quickly backed out, apologizing. "Mrs. Edwards, Alice," he called tentatively from outside. "It's Martin Reynolds, Robert's attorney. Could I have a word?" I composed myself and stepped out. Martin had handled Robert's estate and had always been kind to me. He gestured vaguely toward my name tag and some of the comments. I sighed. "It's just a joke." Martin's expression darkened. "It's not funny." And Robert would have been furious. He hesitated, then lowered his voice. There's something you should know. Something Robert insisted I not tell you unless it became necessary. He reached into his inner jacket pocket and withdrew an envelope. This is a caveat to Robert's will. He added it shortly before he passed. I opened it with trembling fingers and read. The legal language was complex, but the meaning was clear. Any descendant who publicly humiliated me would be disinherited from their share of Robert's fortune much larger than I had realized. I looked up at Martin, stunned. Why wouldn't he tell me this? He hoped it would never be needed, Martin said quietly. He wanted them to treat you right because they loved you, not because they feared losing their inheritance. I glanced back toward the ballroom where my family celebrated, unaware that their behavior had just cost them millions. What do you want to do? Martin asked. I carefully folded the document and handed it back to him. Nothing, not yet. I need to see just how far they'll go. As I returned to the reception, the name tag felt heavier against my chest. But now, instead of shame, I felt something different stirring inside me, a determination to finally see my family for who they truly were. Would you like to come over for dinner tonight? I asked impulsively. Michael smiled. I'd like that. That evening, we sat in my warm kitchen, eating roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and green beans, a simple meal, but comforting. As the light dimmed outside, I found myself opening up to Michael about the things I'd been carrying alone for too long. His parents' constant financial demands, the way they'd chipped away at my confidence, and the way Robert's absence seemed to embolden them. I'm not surprised, Michael said quietly. I've watched it happening. After Grandpa died, it was like they saw you as an ATM. I offered. He nodded. And it's getting worse. Last week I overheard them talking about your house again. I set down my fork. What did they say? He hesitated. They were discussing how to convince you to move into Sunrise Acres. I was stunned. That house was my sanctuary, full of memories, of Robert, our children, and a life built together. Dad said it would be better for everyone if you downsized, Michael continued. He said the real estate market is hot, and they could help you maximize your investment. My stomach turned. It wasn't just about my money anymore, they wanted my home too. Michael, I said, heart pounding. There's something I need to tell you. It's about your grandfather's will. Just as I opened my mouth to explain the codicil, the doorbell rang. Through the window, I saw Richard's car in the driveway. It's your father, I said. Michael's expression darkened. You don't have to answer it. No, I said, rising. It's time we cleared the air. I opened the door. Richard stormed in, his face red. What the hell was that performance at brunch? He froze when he saw Michael. What are you doing here? Having dinner with Grandma, Michael said evenly. Something the rest of you might try sometime without asking for money. Stay out of this, Michael, Richard snapped. This is between your mother and me. No, I said firmly. Michael stays. I'm done with the whispered conversations and Let's put everything on the table. Richard looked at me like I was speaking another language. I've had enough of your attitude, Mom. First, the scene at brunch, and now you're poisoning Michael against us. I remained calm, seated in Robert's old armchair. Michael stood beside the fireplace, arms crossed. No one's poisoning anyone, I replied. We're just acknowledging the truth. And what truth is that? Richard barked. That you've treated me like a bank, not a mother, Michael said. He ticked off the offenses, the name tag, the honeymoon announcement, discussions about selling my house, all without my consent. Richard turned toward me, voice softening. Mom, you're misunderstanding everything. We're just trying to help. You're not getting any younger. I'm 65, Richard. Not 95. My mind is sharp, and I can handle my affairs. But Dad left you so much. He left me exactly what he intended to. His estate is not a family piggy bank. Richard's mask cracked. So what? You're cutting us off because Pamela made a stupid joke. No. I'm making my own decisions now. If Jennifer and Mark want a honeymoon in Bali, they can save for it. If you want a bigger house, you can work for it. He stared at me, speechless. Then he turned to Michael. I want to talk to my mother alone. I'm staying, Michael said. This is a family business. Something shifted in Richard's expression. He knew the usual tactics wouldn't work with Michael here. Fine, he growled, retreating to the door. But this isn't over. After he left, Michael looked at me apologetically. I'm sorry, Grandma, for not standing up sooner. I hugged him tightly. You're standing now. That's what matters. That night, I sat alone, thinking about Robert and the codicil. Had we gone wrong raising Richard? Or had he always felt entitled? I didn't want a confrontation about the codicil. That would only provoke more manipulation. No, I needed a quiet strategy. I would let them keep showing their true colors. The next morning, I called Robert's attorney, Martin Reynolds. I need to understand Robert's will. Not just the codicil, everything. Come in this afternoon, Martin said. His office was warm, lined with books and dark wood. He explained Robert's holdings. Several companies sold at the right time, smart, conservative investments. I knew we were comfortable, I said faintly. But this, Robert was private about money, Martin said. He never wanted you to become one of those women chasing country clubs and designer bags. That sounds like him. Martin nodded. And the codicil is powerful. Any descendant who publicly humiliates you forfeits their inheritance. And the name tag qualifies. Absolutely. As does the brunch. But you don't have to act now. The document stands for your lifetime. What if I want to make changes to my own will? What did you have in mind? By the time I left his office, I had a plan. No drama, no ultimatums. Just quiet reclaiming. I called an old friend for lunch, then stopped by the community center and picked up a brochure for adult painting classes. Robert had always encouraged my creativity. That evening, I began researching small business loans. Michael had once dreamed of opening a bookstore. Maybe I could help him. When Pamela called, I let it go to voicemail. Her message was predictable. We think there was a misunderstanding. Jennifer says you changed your mind about the honeymoon. Call me back. I didn't. Instead, I wrote a check, a modest one, and included it in a card for Jennifer and Mark, wishing them a lovely New England honeymoon. Then, I mailed it. 6 months passed. I enrolled in painting. I reconnected with friends. I funded Michael's bookstore plan. Richard and Pamela oscillated between silence and forced pleasantries. Each visit ended with a financial talk, home upgrades, Jennifer's new baby, and their retirement. I always smiled and said, I'm not discussing my finances. They didn't take it well. Pamela's texts became passive-aggressive. Richard's tone grew sharp. But I felt stronger than ever. On my 66th birthday, Michael insisted on hosting a small dinner at my home. Time they remember whose house this is, he said. I put on a red dress, bold, confidant, and dead-headed roses in my garden. The yard, like my spirit, had been neglected. But it was blooming again. By 5 o'clock, guests began arriving. Richard and Pamela brought flowers and fake smiles. Alice, you look different, Pamela said. Thank you, I replied, leading them. Jennifer and Mark arrived next, followed by Martin and old friends. We made small talk, ate cheese, and sipped wine. But the tension lay underneath like a stretched wire. As we sat down to dinner, Pamela noticed a painting. Did you redecorate? Just a few things. I've been taking classes. Richard frowned. Painting. Michael beamed. Grandma's already sold 2, at the art fair. Pamela blinked. Why would you need to sell paintings? It's not about need, I said. It's about joy. We moved on to the bookstore discussion. Michael explained his business plan. Thanks to Grandma, he said. Richard stiffened. Thanks to her. With what money? Mine, I said calmly. We should talk about this privately. There's nothing to talk about, Richard. The tension spiked. Then Jennifer distracted the room with honeymoon photos. The moment passed temporarily. Later, in the kitchen, Pamela cornered me. What's going on with you? First the honeymoon, now this bookstore. You're throwing money away. I'm supporting ambition. There's a difference. We think it's time. You considered Sunrise Acres. Selling this house could help all of us. I stared at her. This house isn't for sale, and my living arrangements are mine to decide. Richard entered. Everything okay? Just wonderful, I said, picking up the cake. Back in the dining room, Richard cleared his throat. Before we have dessert, Pamela and I want to bring something up. He stood. We think Mom's decisions lately have been irrational. We're considering a power of attorney. The room fell silent. Martin set down his cup. Do you have evidence of diminished capacity? She's giving away money. She refuses to downsize. Making decisions you disagree with isn't evidence of incapacity, Martin said. I felt calm. I've paid for renovations, weddings, and vacations. I've been a checkbook, not a mother. That stops now. Richard stood. So that's it. You're cutting us off? No, I said, meeting his eyes. I'm finally standing up for myself. And so, The quiet revolution continued. Not with yelling, not with threats, but with peace, with purpose, with power. Aware of how this looked to the others, Richard was beyond caring. You think you can just cut us off? Dad would be ashamed of you. It was at that precise moment that Martin Reynolds cleared his throat and spoke the words that would change everything. Richard, he said, your father anticipated this exact situation. The silence that followed was absolute. Richard stood frozen, his mouth slightly open, as Martin reached into his jacket and removed a familiar envelope. Robert added a caveat to his will shortly before he passed, Martin explained to the stunned room. He was concerned about how Alice might be treated after he was gone. What kind of codicil? Pamela demanded, finding her voice first. Martin looked at me, silently asking permission. I nodded. The caveat states that any descendant who publicly humiliates Alice forfeits their entire inheritance, Martin said, his voice steady. This includes treating her with disrespect, attempting to control her finances against her wishes, or trying to force her from her home. That's ridiculous, Richard sputtered. Dad would never. He did, Martin interrupted. And as executor of his estate, I've been documenting the incidents over the past several months. He turned to me. Alice, I have to ask, do you want to enforce the codicil? All eyes turned to me. I looked at Richard and Pamela, their faces now pale with shock and dawning horror. I looked at Jennifer, who seemed confused and embarrassed. Then I looked at Michael, whose expression held nothing but quiet support. Yes, I said finally. I do. Richard collapsed back into his chair. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious, I replied. The name tag at the wedding, the honeymoon announcement at the brunch, the constant demands for money, and now this attempt to declare me incompetent. All of it stops today. But our inheritance, Pamela whispered, is forfeit, Martin confirmed. All of it, Jennifer, too. She asked, her voice small. Martin nodded. I'm afraid so. The codicil is quite clear. Jennifer's eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry, Grandma. I should have said something at the wedding about the name tag. I reached across the table and took her hand. We all make mistakes, sweetheart. The question is what we learn from them. So what happens now? Mark asked, putting his arm around Jennifer. Now, Martin said, according to the terms of the codicil, Richard and Pamela's share of Robert's estate is redistributed. To whom? Richard demanded. Half goes to Alice outright, Martin explained. The other half is divided among descendants who have shown her proper respect and care. All eyes turned to Michael, who looked genuinely surprised. I didn't know, he said quickly. I swear, Grandma, I had no idea about any of this. I know, sweetheart, I assured him. Your grandfather would be proud of the man you've become. Richard stood up again, his face contorted with anger. This is a setup, a conspiracy. I'll contest it in court. You're welcome to try, Martin said calmly, but the caveat is legally binding, and we have ample evidence of the conditions being met. Alice, Pamela began, her voice suddenly honeyed. Surely we can work this out as a family. We never meant save it. Pamela, I cut in. It's too late for that. So that's it, Richard demanded. After everything we've done for you, you're just cutting us off. No, Richard, I said, standing to face my son directly. After everything I've done for you, I'm finally standing up for myself. There's a difference. The gathering ended shortly after. Jennifer and Mark left with awkward apologies and promises to call soon. Richard and Pamela stormed out without another word. Martin and the other guests made tactful exits, leaving just Michael and me in the sudden quiet of my home. Are you okay? He asked, helping me clear the barely touched dessert plates. I'm better than okay, I replied, surprised to find it was true. I feel free. 1 year later, I stood in the doorway of Chapter 1. The bookstore Michael had finally opened in a charming converted Victorian house downtown. The morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating shelves of carefully curated books and comfortable reading nooks. A coffee counter staffed by Michael's girlfriend Emma served locally roasted beans and homemade pastries. In the children's section, a mural I had painted covered one wall, a whimsical forest scene with hidden animals and fairy houses for young readers to discover. Twice a week, I led storytime for neighborhood children, something I'd never imagined myself doing before. The small apartment upstairs had been renovated as well, not for Emma. I still loved my home with its memories of Robert, but for a young writer-in-residence program Michael had established with part of his inheritance. The bell over the door jingled, and Jennifer stepped in, pushing a stroller with her 3-month-old daughter Roberta, named after her grandfather. "Grandma," Jennifer called, spotting me. "I didn't know you'd be here today." "Just dropping off some new bookmarks I painted," I said, bending to admire baby Roberta. "Hello, little one." Over the past year, Jennifer and I had slowly rebuilt our relationship. After the initial shock of the inheritance revelation, she had made genuine efforts to connect with me independently of her parents. Mark had proven to be a steadying influence, encouraging her to form her own opinions rather than echoing her mother's. Richard and Pamela were a different story. After several failed attempts to contest the codicil, they had moved to Florida, where Richard had taken a job with a former business associate. Our communication was limited to terse Christmas cards and occasional updates through Jennifer. "Have you heard from your parents lately?" I asked as Jennifer settled at a small table with the baby. "Mom called last week," she said with a sigh. "Same conversation as always. Complaints about Dad's job, the house they had to settle for, how unfair everything is." "I'm sorry." "Don't be," Jennifer said firmly. "They made their choices. I've made mine." Emma brought over coffee and fresh scones, cooing over the baby before returning to the counter. Michael emerged from the back room with a stack of new arrivals, his face lighting up when he saw us. "Perfect timing," he said, joining us at the table. "I wanted to run something by you both." He explained his idea for expanding the store's community programs, including literacy tutoring for adults and writing workshops for teens. "It would mean reinvesting some of the profits," he added, "but I think it's worth it." "I think it's wonderful," I said, feeling a surge of pride as they discussed the details. I gazed around the sunlit bookstore, this beautiful space that represented not just Michael's dream, but a new chapter for all of us. In the year since the revelation, I had discovered parts of myself that had been dormant for too long. I'd made new friends, developed my painting, even started traveling simple weekend trips at first. Then 2 weeks in Italy with a senior tour group where I'd met Claude, a widower from Boston with kind eyes and a dry wit, who called me every Sunday now. Robert would have approved not just of the bookstore or my newfound independence, but of the boundaries I'd finally established. He had tried to protect me with his codicil, but in the end, I had learned to protect myself. Jennifer's baby let out a happy gurgle, drawing me back to the present. This was my family now, not perfect, not complete, but real. We were building something new from the ruins of what had been lost. And it was, in its way, beautiful. "What do you think, Grandma?" Michael asked, pulling me into the conversation. I smiled at my grandson and granddaughter, at the baby who represented our future, at the bookstore that had grown from trust and respect rather than obligation and greed. "I think," I said, "that this is exactly where we're supposed to be." 6 months after the opening of Chapter 1, the bookstore was thriving. Michael had expanded the reading programs. Emma was managing the coffee bar with a blend of artistry and efficiency, and my mural had become a local favorite. Children came not only for stories but to count the hidden forest creatures I had carefully painted among the trees. It was early spring when Claude came to visit from Boston. We had kept in touch since Italy, our Sunday phone calls growing into a warm companionship. He stepped into the bookstore carrying tulips, his face breaking into a familiar, lopsided smile. "For you, Alice," he said, offering the bouquet. "They're lovely," I said, feeling the warmth of the moment bloomed inside me. Michael gave me a knowing wink as he passed us with a stack of books. Jennifer, watching from the counter, offered to watch the front so Claude and I could take a walk. We strolled through the town square, down the path that led to the riverbank. The cherry blossoms were just beginning to open, their petals swirling gently in the breeze. "Do you ever think about starting over?" Claude asked as we paused by a bench. "I think about starting fresh," I replied. "Starting over sounds like erasing everything." "I don't want to erase, I want to build on it." Claude smiled. "You're remarkable, Alice." I looked out at the river, thinking about all that had changed. The name tag, the brunch, the confrontation. It had once felt like an earthquake. Now it felt like the tremor that woke me up. Jennifer had become a more thoughtful, grounded young woman. Her relationship with Mark grew stronger by the month, and baby Roberta had become the light of our lives. Richard and Pamela had faded into the periphery, their distance a relief more than a sorrow. On my 67th birthday, I hosted a garden party in my backyard, the first celebration I had organized for myself in years. Michael arranged the food. Emma set up coffee and cakes. Jennifer brought flowers from her garden, and Claude arrived with a bottle of Prosecco and his gentle humor. as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light across the faces of friends, neighbors, and newfound family. I stood up to offer a toast. 2 new beginnings, I said. 2 boundaries, and bridges. To know your worth, and never apologize for it. Glasses clinked. Michael hugged me tightly. After the guests had gone, and twilight settled in, I sat in the garden alone for a moment. Fireflies danced over the roses. A breeze whispered through the leaves. And in that stillness, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Peace, not the peace of silence or surrender, but the peace that comes from knowing you've taken control of your story, that you've rewritten the ending. I had spent so much of my life accommodating others, believing that kindness meant giving until you had nothing left. But I had learned something. Precious true kindness includes yourself. And as I stood to gather the last of the plates, I looked up at the stars and whispered, "Thank you, Robert, for the codicil, for the love, but most of all, for helping me become the woman I am now." Then I walked inside, into a home filled with laughter, art, and the scent of tulips, and into the rest of my beautiful, unburdened life.